Today we're going to be making a drawstring bag that has a circular base. As I was trying to figure out what to sew, I was kind of inspired by current events. Lately, it seems like toilet paper is an amazingly rare commodity. It's like gold. So I figured, well, there may be some people who want to travel with their toilet paper, carry it around with them, so perhaps you might need a bag to protect it. So we're gonna do a little drawstring bag, just the perfect size for one of these guys. So let's get started. The first thing you need is 8.5 inches of cotton fabric. It should be about 42 inches to 44 inches selvage to selvage, and make sure that you cut off those selvage edges. The first thing you want to do is from one end, cut a 20-inch rectangle. So I'm going to grab my ruler, line it up with my grid here. I'm going to mark 20 inches, which is right here. I'll draw a line and let's cut. If you have a rotary cutter, those are awesome as well. So this rectangle will be the side of our bag. So let's set that off to the side. And now that I have that cut, I'm ready to start my next piece, which will be the circular base. So I have my pattern here. I'm going to line that up along the edge. I'm going to trace it. I'm using a wet erase marker, but you could use anything you have, even just a regular pencil is fine. Notice that I'm cutting this close to the edge of the fabric. The reason is because I want to have my extra fabric remaining to do other projects later. So I want to make sure I'm leaving as much space as I can. Okay, I've got my circle traced and I'll cut that as well. Okay, so my circular base is done, and next I'm going to cut the drawstring. I'm going to use the fabric that I have left here, and I'm going to cut 2 rectangles. I want these rectangles to be about 1¼ inch wide and about 13 to 15 inches long. I'm going to do mine in between. I'm going to do mine 14. So I'll line up my grid ruler and draw my rectangle. Slide it down. Another 1¼ and now I'll cut those out and come back. I've cut out my 2 rectangles for my drawstring, and I'm going to fold this up and save this for later. I have another project that I'll be making next that I'm going to use that for. So the first thing I'm going to do is create my drawstring. My rectangles here are really thin, but I want them to be longer, so I'm going to join them together, and the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to take one rectangle and lay it right side up. I'm going to take the second rectangle and lay it right side down, and I'm going to make sure I align these corners as best as I can. And I am going to sew from here to here along this edge, and you can get a ruler and draw this if you need to. And the way I remember which direction this diagonal goes is that you should have a little triangle left at the end here. So I'm going to take this to the sewing machine and then I'll come back. Take care to watch your fingers as you're pressing. Okay, now that this has been pressed nice and flat and open, I'm ready to construct my drawstring. And there are a couple ways you can do it. One way is to draw a line down the center of this strip as a guide, just right down the middle. I prefer to press, so I'm gonna start at one end and I'm gonna fold this in half, skinny like a hot dog. Here we go. And if you're afraid that you are going to burn or scorch your fingers, especially if you're using steam, they make a lot of wonderful tools that you can use to help protect yourself. I prefer just a regular old silicone spatula. You can hold your fabric with that and then press. Of course, if you use your spatula for crafting, you don't want to use it in the kitchen anymore. And my next step is to fold in the raw edges. So I'm going to lay this open and I'm going to take one short edge and fold it to the center. I want to take a lot of care to make sure it does not go past that center mark. If it does, then your drawstring might not lay flat. And press all the way down. Once you get this whole edge done, you're going to do the same thing to the other edge. And I'll do that and come back. I have my drawstring pressed on both raw edges. Both are pressed to the center. I took a lot of time and care to make sure that they don't cross at all in the center. And now I'm going to fold again. This time, when I fold it in half, all those raw edges should be stuck inside, and I'm going to press one last time. My steam's getting quite hot, so I'm going to hold it with this. You have a couple options when you create your drawstring. You can create your drawstring in a loop, or you can have the ends be loose. I like to do mine in a loop, but you can use whichever method you prefer. If you want to have your drawstrings be loose at the end, you can tuck in the little ends so you don't have any raw edges, or you can use fray check or another type of product to not have frayed edges. So if you wanted to have these edges here, you could tuck this little end in and fold it over. So if you want loose ends to your drawstring, go ahead and do that. I'm going to loop mine, which I'll show you in a bit. So you should have one skinny drawstring like this. And so next we're going to take it to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch right along that edge. We're ready to start sewing our drawstring. As we begin to sew, if you want to make your drawstring a loop, start about 3 inches away from the end. If you're not going to make it a loop, go ahead and start at the beginning. I've marked mine with a pin. You want to sew with a really small seam allowance, probably about a 1/16 of an inch if you can, but you want to make sure that you catch all of the layers. I like to start with my needle down. I'm going to go forward a few stitches and then back stitch. So do as small of a seam allowance as you can, still catching all layers of your fabric. And take your time. like to use my fingers kind of as a barrier to help guide the fabric. If you have a magnetic seam guide, those are great for this purpose as well. You can just set it right on the edge here so that your fabric doesn't move. If as you're sewing you notice that things aren't lining up, go ahead and stop and adjust. So I can see as I'm getting to this section right here that the edges aren't quite meeting. So before I sew, I'm going to take the time to line them up. And again, I'm stopping at my pin 3 inches from the end, because I'm going to loop my drawstring later. If you're not looping your drawstring, then go ahead and sew to the end. Now take a minute to check your drawstring. Make sure that you've caught all of your layers and you don't have any sections that weren't stitched. And now our drawstring is done for the moment, so let's go back and start working on the sides. The first thing you want to do is turn your fabric over to the wrong side. And we're going to create some markings that will act as guides for our drawstring channel. So grab a ruler and a marking tool. And we're going to draw a line along the top raw edge that's 3/4 of an inch away from the edge. So I'm going to overlap my ruler 3/4 of an inch all the way across. And then I'll draw my line. Oh, looks like it slid a little. Okay, that line right there is going to act as a guide for pressing. So I'm going to grab my iron and I'm going to fold up this edge so that it touches my line. Then I'm going to press. If you don't have a long ruler, you can use your gauge. Set your gauge to 3/8 of an inch and then press along the whole top edge. Once that's pressed, then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab my ruler again and I'm going to draw another line again along the whole top edge, and this time my line is going to be 1.5 inches from my fold. So 1.5 inches. Oops, that was 1.25. Let's fix that. 1.5 inches from my fold. Mistakes do happen, so you do want to make sure that whatever tool you're marking with, it's one that can be corrected. I'm going to put a little X through this one so I know that's not my right line. And then I'm going to fold. I'm going to fold up my folded edge to meet my correct line. So this will create a channel that's 3/4 of an inch deep. And let's press. Be careful of your fingers. I'm ready to start sewing the edges. I'm going to fold this in half so the right sides are touching, and I'm going to sew down this edge with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Now I'm going to start below this fold, so I'm going to put a little pin here to remind myself. I'm going to start sewing after the pin. Your drawstring has to be able to slide in and out here, so we don't want to sew there. I'm just going to sew from there down. So I'll do that and I'll be right back. So as you can see, I've stitched these two areas flat. I only stitched on the section for the opening, so I didn't go all the way down. I just started here at this opening and went up to the top, and then here and up to the top. And the reason for that is so that when I create my drawstring, these edges are nice and finished instead of raw. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to fold my channel back the way I had it, all the way around. If you need to, you can give it a little press again to help it stay flat. And now I'm going to sew that in place. I'm going to put a couple pins to make sure it stays in place, especially where I'm starting and stopping. And I find that when I want to sew this, it works best for me if I flip it right side out. Like that. So let's go to the sewing machine and I'll show you how this works. When sewing the channel in place, I like to start from the opening and begin at one end and go around to the other. You want your seam allowance here to be about 1/8 of an inch or less, but you want to make sure you catch all layers of fabric. We're sewing next to the interior fold right here. Whoops, careful of the pins. Make sure that your fabric that you're not sewing is out of your way when you stitch. Be sure to back stitch. And you should now have a nice casing for your drawstring. I found that when sewing something straight to something that's curved, I like to have the flat piece be on the bottom. So when I'm sewing this today, I'm going to have the circular piece be on the bottom, and then I'm going to have the sides be on the top. I'm going to be using a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Start with my needle down. And I'm going to remove the pins as I go. Don't forget to backstitch. As you're sewing this, you're going to want to make sure that the area where you're sewing is flat. It may be a little gathered or puffy here, and that's fine, but where you actually stitch, make sure that it's flat. As I sew, I like to look a little bit beyond where I'm stitching. A lot of times if there's a little pleat or a fold, like here, it's something that's easier to fix ahead of time rather than when you're right there. Whoops, pin. If you sew over pins like I do occasionally, take care. It's really not the best thing to do. You could break your needle, you could break your pin. It could be dangerous, so try to take out those pins as you go. And since there are a lot of pins, you may have to stop frequently, and that's okay. That will give you the opportunity to readjust your fabric to make sure that you don't get any pleats when you stitch. It looks like I'm going to get a little pleat right there, so I'm going to readjust it first. If you need to, you can put your needle down and your presser foot up so that you can lay your fabric more flat. A lot of times I can feel with my fingers if I'm going to get a pleat. So if you start to notice that, just take a second, stop, readjust. If you have a purple thing tool or a stiletto, those are usually good to help hold your fabric, especially if you don't want to get your fingers too close to the needle. Now that the circle is attached to the base of our bag, we can finish the edge if you like. You can use a zigzag stitch, you can use an overcast stitch, or you can use a pair of pinking shears, which is what I'm going to use. But you don't have to finish this edge if you don't want to. But I'm just going to do a quick cut with some pinking shears. I'm trimming my seam allowance about in half. You want to make sure that you don't get too close to those stitches. You also want to take care that you don't accidentally cut the side of the bag. The edge of our bag is all nice and finished, and now I'm ready to turn it right side out. There we go, we're getting close. So the next step is to insert our drawstring. So I have my drawstring that we made earlier. I'm now ready to insert my drawstring into my bag. I've got a bodkin at one end of my drawstring. You can also use a safety pin if you don't have a bodkin. I'm going to slide it in one side of the bag. And as you feed it through, take care to make sure that it doesn't get tangled. go ahead and pull it out the opposite side, and you can take off your safety pin or your bodkin. Check along the top edge. You can kind of feel, make sure that it isn't twisted in there anywhere. Okay, and if you've decided to have your drawstring ends loose, then you just need to tie them in a knot. So you just grab your two ends, loop them over and through, pull, and you'd be finished. Mine, I want to sew a loop. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my two ends and lay them flat. I'm going to open up one end, and I'm going to open up the other end. And then if you recall at the very beginning when we connected our drawstrings, we laid them with right sides together, perpendicular to each other. Like so, to where it kind of makes a little square. And then we sewed diagonally across the corner, leaving a little triangle. We're going to do that same thing again. So I'll do that and come back. Okay, I have sewn this little corner together here with my diagonal stitches. Before I cut that off, I want to check to make sure it lays flat and it's not twisted. Once you've checked to make sure it looks nice, go ahead and trim that off to about 1/4 of an inch like we did before. Oop, don't want those. Like my scissors. Press it flat with just your fingers. And once you get that flat, go ahead and refold your drawstring as before. And you'll see that I've got a nice stitched together drawstring. So now all I've got to do is close this section here. So I'm going to sew this little section that I left open with about 1/16 of an inch seam allowance, just like I did before. I've now finished my drawstring. It's all looped together. I've stitched the edges so they're all closed, and so now I've got a couple of options for finishing. I can tie this in a knot just like I would have if they were loose, or you can stitch right across here to connect them. So if you want to stitch, what you want to do is lay your bag flat, make sure it's fully extended as far as it will go, and then you can do a few stitches here. You want to back stitch really well to hold that together to create a loop. So I'll go do that. Okay, and now that's stitched, I'm going to make sure I trim off all of my threads. Got a little tangled there on the back. Okay, and now I can pull it to close up my drawstring. Just like that. And I'm finished. Let's see how it works. Let's open up our bag. Fill it up. And pull. And there we go. We have a nice, cute, mini drawstring bag for anything you want to carry, even your toilet paper. Hope you've enjoyed this project. Happy sewing. Good luck on your own drawstring bags.